In the Italian Alps stands a dam 860 feet tall. It has no cracks, it never broke, and it killed almost 2,000 people. The dam is called Vajont. When it was finished in 1959, it was the tallest thin-arch dam on Earth, taller than the Golden Gate Bridge towers, nearly twice the height of Hoover Dam's crest above the river. A shell of concrete wedged into a gorge so narrow you could shout across it, thin enough at the top that 2 trucks could not pass. Behind it, a reservoir holding nearly 40 billion gallons of water. Above it, a mountain. On the 9th of October 1963, at 39 minutes past 10 at night, a piece of that mountain broke loose. A slab of rock 2 miles wide. It slid into the full reservoir at nearly 70 miles per hour. 45 seconds. That is all it took. The water had nowhere to go except up. A wave climbed more than 800 feet above the crest of the dam, higher than the dam itself.
It cleared the concrete like a wall of black glass and dropped into the valley on the other side. 4 minutes later, the town of Longarone no longer existed. Here is the part that separates Vajont from every other disaster of its kind. Gleno, 1923, the dam collapsed. St. Francis, 1928, the dam collapsed. Malpasses, 1959, the dam collapsed. Vajont did not collapse. Engineers inspected it afterward and found the structure essentially intact. It stands today. And it killed more people than all 3 of those failures combined. Which means the question here is not the usual one. Not why did the concrete fail? The concrete did its job. Every safety factor held. If Vajont had been a test of engineering, it would have been a triumph.
The question is why almost 2,000 people were sleeping with their windows dark and their doors unlocked in the path of a wave that had been measured, modeled, and predicted years before it arrived. The event was so violent that seismographs registered it across half of Europe. Instruments in Vienna, in Brussels, recorded the moment a mountainside hit a lake in the Dolomites. The energy released has been compared to an underground nuclear test. Rescue teams arriving before dawn found something stranger than wreckage. They found absence. A flat expanse of gray gravel where a town of streets, squares, a railway station, and a 900-year history had stood at 10 o'clock the previous evening. Because they knew. The engineers watched that mountain slide toward the water for 3 years. They drilled it. They instrumented it. In the final days, their gauges showed the slope moving up to 8 inches every 24 hours. Animals had already abandoned the mountainside. Trees were tilting, and the reservoir stayed full. There was even a scale model, a physical simulation of the landslide falling into the reservoir, built by one of Italy's leading hydraulic laboratories, commissioned to answer one question: how big will the wave be? Miniature landslides were dropped into a miniature lake, and the surge was measured and a safe water level was calculated. The results of those tests never reached the public. They stayed inside the company's files. The communities in the path of the real wave learned that the experiment had existed only after they had become its result. So the questions stack up, and each one is heavier than the last. What did the men reading those instruments actually believe was going to happen? If a mountain announces its own collapse for 3 years, who decides that the water stays? At what point does an engineering project stop being a calculation and become a bet placed with other people's lives?
And if a modern instrumented, scientifically supervised structure could produce this, what exactly protects the valleys below the thousands of large dams operating right now? I have read the documents from this case, and I want to show you the one detail I cannot get past. On the last morning, the 9th of October, the instruments on the mountain were read as usual. The numbers were written down as usual. By the end of this video, you will see what those numbers said and why the men who read them told no one in the valley below. This is the story of the only great dam disaster in which the dam was innocent. Northern Italy, the early 1950s. The country is rebuilding from war, and rebuilding runs on electricity. Hydroelectric power is the engine of the boom, and the Alps are the fuel. Private energy companies race each other up the valleys, damming rivers, flooding gorges, stacking reservoirs like batteries in the mountains.
The most ambitious of them is a company called SADE, the Adriatic Society of Electricity. By mid-century, it is an empire. Dozens of plants, a private grid feeding Venice and the industrial Northeast, and enough political weight in Rome to write much of its own oversight. Its crown project is the Vajont Gorge, a slot canyon in the Dolomites, where an entire mountain watershed funnels into a chasm barely wide enough for the river at its bottom. Stand on the rim, and the space plays tricks on the body. The walls drop away for hundreds of feet, close enough together that a voice carries from one side to the other, and the torrent at the bottom registers not as sound, but as a faint, constant vibration in the rock under your boots. For a dam builder, it is a perfect site. Narrow gorge, hard limestone walls, enormous head of water, a minimum of concrete buying a maximum of depth. The man in charge is Carlo Semenza, SADE's chief engineer, one of the most respected dam designers in Europe, with a career of arches across the Alps behind him, and a reputation for structures that looked too slender to stand and stood anyway. His design for Vajont is audacious, even by the standards of the era. A double curved arch, 860 feet from foundation to crest, yet so thin at the top that the crest is narrower than a two-lane road. The structure works like an eggshell. It does not resist the water by weight, the way the great gravity dams do. It leans into the canyon walls and converts pressure into compression, so that the harder the reservoir pushes, the tighter the arch locks into the rock. Construction begins in 1957, with crews working from cableways strung across the void. By September 1959, the tallest thin-arch dam in the world is complete. It is the summit of Semenza's career, and he knows it. The engineering press celebrates. The valley does not. Because the people who live above the gorge, in the villages of Erto and Casso, perched on the slopes over the future reservoir, already have a name for the mountain on the southern shore. They call it Monte Toc. In the local dialect, toc means rotten, a piece of something, a thing that crumbles. This is not folklore for atmosphere. It is observation compressed into a word. In autumn, when rain soaks the slopes, the older residents of Erto can hear the mountain at night, a deep, irregular cracking from inside the rock, like beams settling in an old house the size of a province. Their grandparents heard it too. The slopes of Monte Toc are scarred with old slip surfaces, bulges, and springs that appear and vanish between one season and the next. Fields on that flank develop steps overnight. Fences go out of line. The people who farm that ground treat it the way sailors treat a bad stretch of coast. Usable, profitable, and never, ever trusted. The engineers surveying the gorge see something different, because they are measuring different things. They see the northern wall, sound, layered limestone, ideal abutment rock, and they anchor their calculations there. The southern wall, Monte Toc's flank, is examined and judged stable enough. Geology reports are commissioned, and here the pattern of the next decade appears for the first time. The reports disagree, and the disagreement is resolved by seniority rather than by evidence. The most optimistic assessments rise to the top of the file. When residents of Erto file formal protests against the reservoir, they will lose grazing land, mule tracks, the low fields by the river. The objections are processed as a compensation problem, a price question, not a safety question. The reservoir is scheduled to fill, and in the summer of 1959, while the concrete is still curing, a young geologist arrives in the valley to study the southern slope in detail. He will spend months walking Monte Toc, mapping its scars, drilling into its flank. What he finds there will contradict the entire premise of the project his own father has just finished building. His name is Eduardo Semenza, the chief engineer's son. Eduardo Semenza is 29 years old, trained in geology, and he approaches Monte Toc the way a pathologist approaches a body. He is not interested in what the mountain looks like. He is interested in what it has done. Through 1959 and 1960, he and a colleague mapped the southern slope meter by meter. They find a chaotic mass of broken rock where there should be clean bedding. They find a spring line running across the flank at a suspiciously constant elevation. They find, buried in a stream cut, a layer of crushed and sheared material of the kind that forms only in one place, along the sliding surface of an ancient landslide. His conclusion is precise and enormous. The entire lower flank of Monte Toc is not a mountainside at all. It is the corpse of a prehistoric landslide, a mass of more than 250 million cubic yards that detached in the deep past, slid, stopped, and grew a forest on its back. It rests on layers of clay that, when wet, behaves like a greased rail. And at the base of that dead landslide, his father's company is now raising a lake. The mechanism could not be simpler. Water rising in the reservoir seeps into the foot of the slope. Pore pressure climbs. Friction along the old clay surfaces drops. The mass that stopped moving thousands of years ago gets exactly one thing it has been missing: lubrication. Eduardo's report goes into SAD's files. Senior consultants review it. Some are alarmed. Others find reasons for comfort. Perhaps the mass is smaller. Perhaps it will move slowly. Perhaps in pieces. The optimistic reading, once again, floats to the top. While the report circulates privately, one person is saying the same thing publicly. Her name is Tina Merlin. She is a journalist for the newspaper La Unità. She grew up in these valleys, and she carries a biography that makes her hard to intimidate. During the war, as a teenager, she ran messages for the partisans through these same mountains. She has been talking to the farmers of Erto, the people who hear the mountain at night, and she takes their knowledge seriously as evidence which no one with an engineering degree has yet done. In 1959, she begins publishing warnings. The slope above the reservoir is unstable. The villagers know it, and the company knows it too. SAD's response is not a technical rebuttal. It is a lawsuit.
Merlin is taken to court for spreading, in the words of the charge, false and tendentious news capable of disturbing public order. In 1960, a tribunal in Milan acquits her on the grounds that what she wrote appears to be substantially true. The acquittal is barely reported. The filling of the reservoir continues on schedule. Then the mountain confirms everything. November 1960. The water has climbed for the first time to within 250 feet of the dam's crest. On the 4th of the month, nearly 1 million cubic yards of rock peel off the toe of Monte Toc and slump into the water. On its own, a minor slide. What matters is what appears above it. Over the following days, a crack opens across the flank of the mountain. A continuous fissure in the shape of a giant letter M, 1.5 miles long, tracing an arc from the shoreline up to nearly 3,000 feet and back down again. The engineers walk it, photograph it, map it. There is no ambiguity about what it is. It is a perimeter. The mountain has drawn on its own surface the exact outline of the mass that intends to leave. 250 million cubic yards, now visibly separated from the rest of the mountain, resting on wet clay with a lake at its feet. To grasp the number, a mass roughly 100 times the volume of concrete in the dam itself, hanging above the reservoir that the dam exists to hold. Filling is suspended. The engineers gather their data. Carlo Semenza, in private correspondence from these months, admits what the public documents never will: that after a lifetime of mastering concrete and rock, he has met a problem that may be beyond control. Nature, he writes, can find ways that human calculation does not foresee. He dies of illness in October 1961, and the doubt dies with him, filed among his papers. And inside the company, a new idea begins to form. An idea so rational, so confident, that it will guide every decision for the next 3 years and kill almost 2,000 people. They decide the landslide can be managed. Here is what the engineers discovered in the winter of 1961, and it is the hinge of this entire story. When they lowered the reservoir after the November slide, the mountain slowed down. Benchmarks that had been creeping several centimeters a day eased to millimeters. When months later they cautiously raised the water again, the creep accelerated. Lower the lake, the mountain calms. Raise the lake, the mountain wakes. To a certain kind of mind, this is not a warning, it is a control panel. The plan that emerges is called, in the documents, the controlled landslide. The reasoning runs like this. The mass on Monte Toc will fall eventually. That is now accepted. But its speed appears to respond to the water level.
Therefore, by raising and lowering the reservoir in careful cycles, the mass can be encouraged to slide slowly, settling into the basin over months or years, gently, while the level is kept low enough that any wave stays inside the gorge. The landslide would not be prevented, it would be scheduled. As insurance, a bypass tunnel is driven through the opposite bank, so the reservoir can still function after the slide. And to answer the critical question, how big is the wave? SADE commissions a physical scale model at the hydraulic laboratory in November, under Professor Augusto Getty of the University of Padua. Engineers rebuild the Vajont Basin in miniature and drop simulated landslides into it, measuring the surge. The model delivers a number. Keep the water surface at least 80 feet below the crest of the dam, and the wave will not endanger the valley.
The trials also record something quieter, and this is the one place in this story where something was genuinely kept from view. The model results remain an internal company document, unknown to the communes downstream. There is a problem inside the number 2. The model slides are made of loose gravel, entering the water in stages. If the real mass moves as a single coherent block, faster, denser, the model has no answer. The Austrian geologist Leopold Müller, SADE's own consultant, has already warned that the mass may move as one body. This is the sentence I keep returning to in the files. Everyone proceeds as if the gravel is the truth and the mountain is the approximation. Meanwhile, the calendar supplies a motive. Italy is nationalizing its electricity industry. SADE's assets are to be transferred to the new state monopoly, Enel, with compensation tied to plants that are complete and operational. A reservoir stuck at a cautious level is an asset in doubt.
Vajont must be finished, tested at full capacity, certified, delivered. The controlled landslide is no longer only an engineering strategy. It is a financial deadline. So, through 1962 and into 1963, the cycles run. Fill, watch, lower, fill higher. The daily ritual on the mountain has the texture of laboratory work. Surveyors climb to the benchmarks in the morning cold, read the targets through theodolites, and phone the millimeters down to the office, where they are entered into ledgers and plotted as smooth, reasonable curves. The mountain has been converted into a graph, and a graph, unlike a mountain, always looks manageable. In the spring of '63, the level climbs toward the maximum, within roughly 50 feet of the crest, higher than the water has ever stood. The dam is to be certified at full capacity for the handover to the state. And in September, the mountain answers. The benchmarks accelerate, a centimeter a day, then several. By early October, points on the flank of Monte Toc are moving up to 8 inches every 24 hours, a speed at which the movement of a mountainside stops being a measurement and becomes something you could almost stand and watch. You did not need instruments anymore. On the slope, mature trees lean downhill at angles trees do not survive. Grazing animals refused the mountainside and had to be driven off it. By the first week of October, they no longer went at all. In Erto, the night cracking was continuous. The gauges in the ground were finally saying the same thing. On the 8th of October, the engineers begin lowering the reservoir. But an alpine reservoir is not a bathtub. It drains through turbines and outlets at a pace measured in days, and autumn rain is refilling it from above as fast as the valves release it below. The level creeps down by inches, while the mountain moves by inches. and the mountain is faster.
The bet in its final form is that Monte Toc will wait for the water. It will not. It will wait one more day. The 9th of October, 1963. Evening settles over the valley of the Piave. In Longarone, the town on the valley floor a mile downstream of the dam, the bars are full. On television that night, there is football. Real Madrid against Glasgow Rangers, a European Cup tie, and the sets in the cafes along the main street draw their usual crowds. Above the town, invisible in the dark, the crest of the dam cuts a thin line across the mouth of the gorge. The reservoir behind it stands close to the model's safety line, about 80 feet below the crest. The lowering, begun the day before, has barely moved it. It has been raining for days, on and off. The soaking autumn rain that the old people of Erto associate with the mountain's night noises. The Vajont torrent runs high. The air in the valley is cold and heavy. The particular stillness of an alpine October night, when sound carries and nothing moves. On the dam itself, the night shift is at work. Technicians and watchmen, several dozen men, stationed on the crest and in the offices carved beside the abutments. Their instruments have been transmitting the mountain's acceleration for weeks. In the past days, the readings have gone beyond anything in the ledgers. The men closest to the data are physically closest to the mountain. No general warning has gone down to the valley floor. Longarone, administratively, is not even considered to be at risk from the reservoir. It sits behind the dam, and the dam is sound. At 39 minutes past 10, the flank of Monte Toc detaches along the perimeter it drew for itself 3 years earlier. 350 million cubic yards of rock. A slab 2 miles wide and up to a mile deep from crest to toe moves as a single body, exactly as Mueller had feared and the gravel model could not imagine. It does not crumble, it travels. The entire mass crosses the gorge and rams into the reservoir at close to 70 miles per hour, riding its clay layers like a ship going down a slipway. Seismographs across Europe record the impact. From first movement to full stop, about 45 seconds. The slide is so large it does not fall into the lake, it replaces it. The mass crosses the entire basin, climbs 460 feet up the opposite bank, and stops. 13 billion gallons of water are squeezed out of existence between rock and split into 2 waves. One wave runs east, up the reservoir, along the shoreline settlements below Erto and Casso. Hamlets standing near the waterline, Frasen, Lispese, San Martino, are erased in the dark. Casso, high on its slope, is struck by spray and falling stones thrown more than 800 feet above lake level. The other wave turns toward the dam. What crosses the crest of the tallest thin-arch dam in the world is a wall of water on the order of 800 feet high, black, silent to those below, and preceded by something faster than itself. The displaced air, compressed in the narrow gorge, exits ahead of the wave as a blast wind. In Longarone, in the final seconds, windows burst and roofs lift before any water arrives. Then roughly 8 billion gallons of water, falling more than 800 feet, land on the valley floor and unmake the town. The energy involved defeats comparison, but the numbers can be stated. Water reaching the valley floor at that height arrives with the force of impact, not of flooding. Reinforced buildings are not knocked down, they are removed. The town's stone church, its bell tower, its railway station, the entire fabric of streets, reduced to a layer of debris and then scoured away by the outflow racing down the Piave. In the surrounding hills, people wake to a roar, then a shockwave, then silence, and look down at a darkness where the lights of the town had been minutes before. At 10:43, 4 minutes after the mountain moved, it is over. Where Longarone stood, there is a plain of washed gravel, swept to the bedrock, shaped like a fan. Villarreal, Pirago, Rivalta, Fae, gone with it. The men on the dam crest are gone. The final count of the dead approaches 2,000. Hundreds are never found at all. The dam stands.
Scarred at the crest, its railing and roadway stripped, and structurally whole, the eggshell held against a load its designers never dreamed of. Days later, the writer Dino Buzzati, sent by the Corriere della Sera, stands above the gorge and files the sentence that Italy will never forget. "A stone fell into a glass of water," he writes, "and the water fell on a town." The stone was a mountain. The glass held millions of tons, and not one drop passed through the dam. The structure was innocent, which left a question the country could no longer avoid asking. Who was not? The morning after, the state arrives in force. Rescue columns, army engineers, government ministers with escorts. The scale of the operation is military because nothing smaller fits the terrain. Thousands of soldiers working a gravel plain under floodlights, in a silence that the men who were there describe as the worst part of the work. And within days, alongside the official mourning, an official explanation begins to circulate. An unforeseeable natural catastrophe, an act of God, a cataclysm of nature, in the phrase of one minister, beyond human prediction. The mountain, the story suggests, betrayed the engineers. One newspaper refuses the story on day one, the paper that has been refusing it since 1959. Its correspondent in the valley is Tina Merlin. Her article does not speculate. It cites her own published warnings by date. The archives say otherwise, and the archives are extensive. 3 years of measurements showing the slope's response to the water level. Eduardo Semenza's map of the ancient landslide, dated 1960. Mueller's warnings that the mass could move as one body. The Nove model results with their 80-foot safety line, and the reservoir held at that line, and above it through the final acceleration. Tina Merlin's articles and the lawsuit that tried to silence them, and the acquittal that confirmed them. Rarely in the history of disasters has an event been so thoroughly documented in advance by the institution that caused it. The criminal investigation names the men who ran the project in its final years. Alberico Biadene, who had inherited technical command after Carlos Semenza's death in 1961. Mario Pancini, the engineer who had overseen the dam site. Officials of the state inspection bodies who had certified each filling. The charge, in essence, they knew the mountain was moving, they knew a wave was possible, and the valley was never warned. Then the trial itself begins to move. Citing public order and the impossibility of impartial proceedings near the disaster, the courts transfer the case out of the region entirely, away from the Piave Valley, away from the survivors, to the city of L'Aquila in the mountains of central Italy, more than 350 miles from the gravel plain where Longarone used to be. Survivors who wish to attend the hearings must cross the country to do so, year after year, as the proceedings grind through appeals.
The geography of the trial becomes its own verdict. The disaster is examined at a distance from which it looks smaller. In the courtroom, the defense argues the wave was unforeseeable in scale, that nature had exceeded every model. The model, of course, was made of gravel. Mario Pancini does not live to hear a verdict. In November 1968, awaiting trial, he ends his own life. Biadene is eventually convicted of foreseeable homicide, the court finds, for the deaths caused by inundation. The sentence is 5 years. Amnesty erases 3 of them. Of the institutions, none is dissolved. The assets, as planned, have long since passed to the state monopoly, which spends years in civil litigation over who owes the survivors compensation: the company that built the mountain's trap or the state that inherited it. And Tina Merlin, the one person with a public, printed, court-tested record of having been right, writes a book about the valley. Publishers decline it, one after another. It finally appears in 1983, 20 years after the wave, 6 years before her death. Here is what I think the file actually shows, and it is worse than a villain. No single man decided to kill Longarone. Instead, at every level, the alarming version of the truth was slightly softened before being passed upward. The geology was uncertain, reported as manageable. The model was limited, reported as reassurance. The creep was accelerating, reported as expected. Each floor of the institution filtered the risk it sent to the floor above, the way the clay filtered water under Monte Toc. By the time the information reached the level where filling could have been stopped and the valley evacuated, it had been polished into safety. The mountain moved as one body. The institution never did. The dam is still there. Drive the mountain road above Longarone today, and it appears suddenly across the gorge. 860 feet of pale concrete, intact, holding back nothing. Behind it lies not a lake, but the landslide itself, a low green wooded hill filling the basin from wall to wall, with a stream threading across its back. The mass that fell in 45 seconds has simply stayed. Engineers concluded long ago that removing it is impossible and unnecessary. The reservoir it destroyed will never exist again. The dam that survived it has never generated a single kilowatt since. Visitors walk the crest now. Guides point out the high scar on Monte Toc, a gray dead face of rock, a mile and a half across, still exactly the shape of the letter M. Nothing grows on it. Around its edges, the forest resumes, as if along a drawn border. From the crest, you can look down the outer face and understand, physically, what 800 feet of falling water means. The guides say that this is the point on the tour where groups go quiet. The wind up there never entirely stops. Below, on the valley floor, Longarone exists again, rebuilt after the wave, a town of straight modern streets standing on the fan of gravel, with a memorial church whose spiral ramp climbs like the inside of a shell. In Erto and Casso, still perched above the buried lake, some of the old houses stand exactly as they did, facing the mountain their dialect had already diagnosed. In 2008, the United Nations, marking the International Year of Planet Earth, cited Vajont among exemplary disasters caused by human error, a catastrophe attributable, in the language of the citation, to the failure of engineers and geologists to understand the problem in front of them.
It has become the case study taught to every student of engineering geology on the planet. The classroom name for what happens when measurement outruns judgment. Vajont did not disappear into history because engineering did not let it. The case forced open a question the profession had preferred to treat as settled. A dam is not a structure. It is a structure plus a basin, plus every slope that leans over the water. Reservoir slope monitoring, drawdown protocols, the entire modern discipline of watching the ground around stored water. The lineage of those rules runs back through committee rooms in Rome to one night in October. Today, instruments stand guard on reservoir slopes on every continent. Every one of them is, in a sense, a descendant of the benchmarks on Monte Toc, the instruments that worked perfectly and saved no one. Because that is the finding that outlives the case. Nothing failed at Vajont. The dam performed beyond its design. The geology behaved exactly as ancient landslides on wet clay behave. The instruments measured the acceleration to the millimeter. The model answered precisely the question it was built to answer. The journalist reported the truth and proved it in court. Every component functioned. Only the connections between them, the willingness of men to carry a frightening number upstairs without rounding it down, failed. A system can be built entirely of working parts and still be rotten. The people of Erto knew this. They had a word for it. I have stood in front of photographs of the crest taken on the morning of October 10th, the railing torn away, the concrete swept clean. And what unsettles me is not the violence of them. It is the neatness. The wave left the dam looking almost maintained. Catastrophe, it turns out, does not always look like ruin. Sometimes it looks like a structure in perfect condition, standing over an empty place. The scar on Monte Toc has not softened in 6 decades. Rain still darkens it every autumn, the way it did in the years when the mountain was announcing itself and the announcements were being filed. Somewhere tonight, on the slopes above other reservoirs, other instruments are recording other small movements, and other readings are being written down and passed along and summarized. The question Vajont leaves behind is not whether we can measure a mountain. We measured this one to the millimeter.
The question is whether any institution, anywhere, has ever been built that prefers a devastating truth to a comfortable number. Before the water rises to find out.